Eva Maria Duarte Peron. She was one of the most, but both came from small towns with great ambitions. Both used their talents to create immensely popular personas. While Evita used her acting ability, Madonna rose to fame through her singing ability. Both had to overcome public scrutiny and scandalous portrayals of their public and private life in order to become the influential forces for which they are known.
The way people have reacted to me portraying Eva Peron and saying, oh, she's vulgar, look at her past, she's not fit to play such a saintly, incredible woman, is exactly what she had to endure and go through when she was in power. There were so many people against her, and they accused her of all the things they're accusing me of now.
When filming of the movie first began, many Argentinians were very skeptical of Madonna's portrayal of their hero. After all, Eva Peron is a saint in their eyes, and no one alive could be perfect enough to portray their beloved Evita.
They do see her as a saint, pure and without fault, and when we first came, they were, trying to run us out and making all this noise and this and that. And I don't really think they cared that much. I think that in the end, we got whatever we wanted quite easily, so I find it hard to believe that they were really, truly opposed to it. We are either going to invent a whole new art form and it's going to be just the most amazing thing, or we're all completely mad. I believe in it. I think it's going to be a real moving piece of work.
Evita was born Eva Maria on May 7th in 1919. Her mother, Juana Ibarguren, commonly known as Doña Juana, was the mistress of Juan Duarte, a married man who was a wealthy, prominent figure in the agricultural area of Argentina, 150 miles from Buenos Aires. She considered herself more than his mistress, and feeling no shame, she proudly adopted his surname, Duarte, for herself and her children, Herminda, Juan, and Eva Maria. Juan Duarte was kind to his mistress and children, but left them behind soon after Eva's birth. This left Doña Juana and her children poverty-stricken. She moved with them to a slum area of Los Toldos. Everywhere they lived, whispers and rumors would follow. The villagers would talk about her and her daughters. Juan Duarte was killed in a car accident in 1926, and though unacceptable as his mistress, Doña Juana dressed her children in black and took them to the funeral to mourn, which further scorned her in the eyes of others. Eva would have been old enough to remember this pilgrimage and understood that there were people who hated her mother and hated her. When Eva wrote her biography, she did not account for her troubled childhood in any way. There is no mention of painful childhood occurrences. The closest she came to speaking of this period was to write, "As far as I can remember, the existence of injustice has hurt my soul as if a nail was being driven into it. From every period of my life, I retain the memory of some injustice tormenting me and tearing me apart." Continually looking for work, the family moved often. Doña Juana was proud of her children and had high standards for them. She demanded high work ethics and best efforts in all they did, and taught her children to behave properly. By the age of 15, Evita was becoming more and more driven to escape her impoverished way of life. She began to develop aspirations of her own. Evita would later say, "In the place where I spent my childhood, there were more poor people than rich. But I made myself believe that there were other places in my country and in the world where things could happen in some other way. I imagined, for instance, that large cities were marvelous places where only wealth existed, and everything I heard about them from other people confirmed this belief. They talked about the great city as if it were a wonderful paradise where everything was beautiful and outstanding." Evita loved the movies and the theater. She recited poetry and lyrics in school, appeared in student productions, and even went to the town's record shop and performed her poems through their sound system. It was around this time Eva told her mother she wanted to be an actress, and though her mother dismissed it, she left for Buenos Aires at the age of 15, uneducated, with no money, little talents, but with big dreams and determination. In pursuit of her dream as an actress, Eva Maria looked for work in the local theaters of Buenos Aires. Her first acting role was with an Argentine comedy company with whom she had won 2 roles before she lost her job and was unemployed again. Shortly before she turned 17 in 1936, she found work touring Argentina with another theatrical company. She had an extensive run with the company until the leading actor insisted that she sleep with him or lose her job. Refusing to be compromised, she left the company. She continued to do bit acting parts in companies in Buenos Aires until December of 1936, when a prominent tabloid journalist and director, Pablo Suero, gave her a part in his production of the Broadway success, The Children's Hour. Other actors described her during this time as young and very pretty, with dark eyes, deep lips, and skin the color and texture of a magnolia, quite transparent. She seemed a personification of innocence, and that is really what she was, very pure inside. In April of '39, just shortly before Eva's 20th birthday, she formed a new radio company with Pascual Bellicciotta to broadcast a series of radio scripts by Hector Blomberg. These brought Evita much sought-after publicity in magazines, including cover photographs and fashion spreads. Her smile was no longer sweet, but hard and teasing, and her hair was upswept and rolled in an elaborate style of the 40s. She was defining her new image. The radio company continued to do more programs with Evita, including romances and soaps. When she found the soaps, she found her career. In 1940, she had 2 parts in unsuccessful films, but by then she had captured the critics' attention. By 1943, after 2 years of working on her radio company, she was earning 5,000 or 6,000 pesos a month, making her one of the best radio actresses of the time. By Buenos Aires standards, she had arrived. Her involvement with radio ultimately was what opened up the door of politics to Evita. On June 4th, 1943, in a surprise coup revolution, the army overthrew the conservatives and the oligarchy, who had earlier manipulated the fraudulent elections in 1932 in a desperate measure to restore democracy in Argentina. The new government believed its regulation extended to radio and all of its programming. It was an early form of fascism. All soap opera scripts had to be submitted to the new government and the Inspector for Posts and Telecommunications for approval at least 10 days before they were broadcast. Eva approached the officer in charge of allocating airtime, Colonel Anibal Imbert, with her new project idea, a series entitled The Heroines of History, promising to deal with high moral and historical themes. On January 16, 1944, an earthquake trembled under the feet of the people of San Juan. The Secretary of Labor in the military government, Colonel Juan Domingo Peron, launched an enormous campaign to raise funds for the victim. He sponsored an artistic festival where actors and actresses would go through the streets of the capital with money boxes for donations, escorted by members of the armed forces. The crowning event at the end of the week would be a great gala with expensive tickets. Evita came to the festival as the radio actress, and Peron would later write in his memoirs about the day he met Evita. There was a woman of fragile appearance, but with a strong voice, with long blonde hair falling loose to her back and fevered eyes. She said her name was Eva Duarte, that she acted on the radio, and that she wanted to help the people of San Juan. I looked at her and felt overcome by her words. I was quite subdued by the force of her voice and her look. Eva was pale, but when she spoke, her face seemed to catch fire. Her hands were reddened with tension, her fingers knit tightly together. She was a mass of nerves. She went to the gala with Rita Molina, a singer friend of hers, but left the stadium that night with Juan Peron. At this time, Peron held 2 important positions in the military government. He was the Secretary of War, while also serving as Secretary of Labor and Social Security. His position in the Labor Office was the one which would afford him the opportunity to sponsor social legislation seeking to liberate the descamisados, or shirtless ones of Argentina. Peron sought unionization and to legislate programs in support of unions and their workers. This support of the working class gave him quite an enormous public following and quite a sudden rise of political support. He had returned to Buenos Aires from Europe in 1942 as a nationalist, helping to found the GOU, Grupo de Oficiales Unidos, a military lodge concerned with strict implementation of fascism in Argentina, based on his belief that the European democracies of Britain and France were in a state of irrevocable decline, and that either communism or fascism was the wave of the future. After the military overthrew the government in June of '43, Perón's GOU gained considerable influence and position in the War Office. He was second in command, so after the president resigned in February of '44, Perón's boss, General Farrell, became the president, and Perón became the war minister. Perón was now the strongest man in the government. He took on the additional position as Secretary of Labor in October of '43, at the time a small position without much influence or responsibility. But Perón took it on as an opportunity to change the perspective of labor and the working class in Argentina. He began by purging the old ineffective unions and creating new ones. His policies were disturbing to the Conservative Party and members of the union movement. But as the only person in labor affairs in the government, he had the power to do as he wished. Despite all the power, he was approachable. As Secretary of Labor, Perón received workers and would listen to their complaints as well as their needs. The working class had no rights, no retirement, and no benefits. Perón sought to improve their working conditions and, more importantly, their way of life. He did this by establishing a minimum wage, paid holidays, and medical care for agricultural workers. This was great for the workers, but angered many of the great landholders, the oligarchy in Argentina. The previous unions had no place for most of the working class of Argentina. It was because Perón did so much for them that these are the ones who became the first Peronistas and the most faithful throughout his political career. After meeting Evita through the San Juan earthquake fundraising efforts, she quickly was an integral part of his daily life, and she was quite visibly his live-in mistress. She continued her work in radio, and the programs received much publicity, raising her salary to 35,000 pesos, the biggest contract at the time in radio broadcasting. In May 1944, the performers of the broadcasting industry organized themselves into a union and elected Evita as president. Soon after, she added to her daily schedule a program called Towards a Better Future. It was a drama in soap opera format, taking on the issues abounding in Argentine problems. At the end of the program came Evita's voice saying, "The revolution did not come without reason. It came because something painful and hard had grown in the country, deep down, where there is hate and passion, and the sense of injustice that makes the blood rush to one's hands and head. The revolution was made for exploited workers. It was made because of the fraud of dishonest politicians and because the country was bankrupt of feeling, at the verge of suicide. There was a man who could bring dignity to the notion of work, a soldier of the people who could feel the flame of social justice. It was he who decisively helped the people's revolution." These nightly programs were blatant propaganda for Perón and his policies. They represented what Perón would stand for when elections came, and they were directed at those who would be his supporters. Evita did these programs in ordinary language, from the perspective of one of those who was listening. In the context of Perón's political meetings, Evita was very prominent at Perón's side, which was disturbing to many. But at this point she was quiet, taking in all the philosophies which Perón stood for and advocated. Not even Perón himself knew at this point the importance that Evita would have for his political entourage in the coming years. In 1944 and 45, as his power in the government and in the minds of the people grew, so did the hostility for Perón grow within and outside of the army. Evita became protective of Perón, screening his visitors and what their intentions were for seeing Perón. She felt like one of the masses that Perón spoke to, for she identified with them from her early beginnings. Her constant presence was a source of much discussion among both Peron supporters and his enemies. As early as spring 1945, his supporters would chant, "Va casarse, va casarse! Get married, get married!" This period in their relationship formulated many myths in the enemy camp about Evita and Peron. The wealthy purported the fantasy that she was a prostitute trying to tie some mythological power to her that elicited some type of control over Peron. Evita continued her radio work and began preparing for what would become the last movie she would do, The Prodigal, a role about an aging society woman in 19th century Spain. The woman was called the Prodigal because of her great generosity. It was an odd choice of a role for Evita, but she did it well. Near this time, in September of 1944, her frail health broke down and doctors ordered her to rest. Both of these events seem to have a foreshadowing effect on later events in Evita's life. 1945 was a year of great turning points in political history for all parts of the world. Berlin fell and the war was ending in the East, and Argentina had its own upheavals. In the center of the crisis stood Peron and Evita, unaware of all that would soon happen in their political life. Both political groups gathering in the streets would assemble to hear Peron. The unions would listen to descriptions of the opposition as an obscure combination of foreign elements, reactionaries, bankrupt politicians, and the egotistical upper class which purported to manipulate the government. On September 19, 1945, the oppositions attempted to bring down the government with a civil war. Within the government, observation of Peron's dealings with Evita took on a larger importance as other officers sought grievance with anything Peron did or anyone he associated with. They perceived his activities as against their establishment. On October 9th, Peron was to announce the appointment of Oscar Nicolini, a worker in the communications office for 25 years, a supporter of Peron's labor policies and a friend of Evita's, to the position of Secretary of Communications. Because Nicolini was a friend of Evita's, his enemies used this opportunity to accuse Peron of a conflict of interest. On Monday, October 8th, a delegation went to the president and demanded Peron's resignation, threatening a march of the troops on the city, putting an end to the government. The president rang Peron. Peron wrote out his resignation from his 3 posts and drafted a petition to resign from the army. The next day, Peron stood in a crowd of 15,000 of his supporters under the pretext of saying farewell to the employees in the labor office, but also taking the opportunity to defend his policies and ask for peace to carry on our triumphant march. He announced a general wage increase and an indexation system which would make salaries and wages sound against inflation. Peron was told that the president had ordered Peron be detained on the grounds that his life may be endangered by the current political situation. Evita's grief and frustration over the next few days is expressed by her in her book. Those 8 days still cause me pain, greater, far greater than anything I would have experienced had I spent them in his company, sharing his pain. I went out in the streets, looking for friends who might still accomplish something on his behalf. I never felt, and I mean this, quite so small, so utterly unimportant as I did during those 8 memorable days. I went through all the barrios of the great city. Ever since, I have felt that I know everything about the hearts that beat beneath my country's sky. In those 8 days, Peronism was born, even without Peron present. Evita and Peron became more than people. They became more than characters. They became representatives of the force that had altered politics. If Evita was the selfish vamp that many thought her to be, she would have gone her own way and started her own life over again at this point. But she loved Peron, and her loyalty to him led her to try to get him out of prison. She received a letter from Peron which portrays the love he felt for her as well. My adored treasure, only when we are separated from those we love can I have not been able to calm my unhappy heart. Now I know how much I love you. and that I cannot live without you. The immense solitude is full of your memory. As soon as I get out, we'll get married and go somewhere and live peacefully. My sweetheart, I have those little pictures of you in my room, and I look at them every day with tears in my eyes. Nothing must happen to you, or my life will end. Take good care of yourself and don't worry about me, but love me very much, because I need your love more than ever. My last word in this letter will be to tell you to keep calm. Many, but many kisses to my dearest Chinita, Peron. Peron wrote a letter to the president which became public October 14th, demanding his release from prison. Peron's staff at the Secretary of Labor was still intact and working on his behalf. The sugar workers staged a strike the following day, and many more followed in the ensuing days, trying to show their support for their imprisoned leader. A committee of established labor leaders that assembled to act on Colonel Peron's behalf decided on a 24-hour strike for October 18th, but the unions already were staging their own continual strikes. Very early on the morning of the 17th, as workers set out from their homes, they did not enter their workplaces, but headed for Buenos Aires with pickets, banners, and signs in hand, amassing an entourage that assembled well over 200,000 by the time it reached the courtyard of the Casa Rosada. They were peaceful, but called for the release of Peron. A confused government and president released Peron and took him to the balcony overlooking the crowd. His appearance was a miracle to the crowd, spawning cheers, tears, and jubilation. Here was the man on whose behalf they had acted, and he was safe, sound, and triumphant. Peron spoke of his retirement from the army and his desire to serve the great masses of Argentines. October 17th marked the beginning of Peronism and would be celebrated as a holiday for years to come. His followers became known as Los Descamisados, the shirtless ones. It was not a derogatory label, but represented the entire working class. They made Peron one of their own on the balcony that night, and that relationship would be a bond in politics for decades to come. 4 days later, in a private civil ceremony, Peron and Evita were wed just as he had promised. Evita was now the wife of a presidential candidate. In the following days, Evita sought to destroy all evidence of her previous life. Her birth records were destroyed and forged. She sent for and received all publicity pictures in the possession of radio stations where she had worked. She confiscated all negatives from photographers, and all copies of films she appeared in disappeared. As a candidate, Peron was supported by the Labor Party, which was founded by union leaders from the General Confederation of Labor, commonly known as CGT, as well as radicals that had taken his side earlier that year. But by the end of the campaign, her presence was such an influential feature of political events that the Buenos Aires Women's Committee changed the name of their center to Eva Maria Duarte de Peron. In the election itself, Peron won convincingly and received 52% of the vote. His candidates won all but one of the provincial governorships, 28 of 30 seats in the Senate, and 2/3 majority in the Chamber of Deputies. Peron now held the future of Argentina in his hand. He assembled those closest to him on his cabinet, including appointing Evita's brother Juan as his private presidential secretary. Evita was not a conventional president's wife. She dressed informally and did not cook meals for their guests. A colleague of Peron said, "She was still almost a girl, and much of the time she behaved like one." In the context of what was expected of women at that time, what she did might have been a calculated gesture with the intention of provoking or shocking, but it was not. She was like that, and that is how she behaved. One would have thought that she would be worried by the responsibility of being Peron's wife, but if she was, she never showed it. She became proprietor of the newspaper Democracia and would reprint the speeches that she and Peron gave prominently. Her pictures were prominent as well, and as circulation climbed from 6,000 to 40,000, it was obvious that Evita's image was good for business. When she attended galas and wore evening dresses, Over 400,000 copies would sell almost exclusively, devoted to pictures and articles about what Evita did and what she wore. The nation's love affair with Evita was growing in full force. As early as June 1946, Newsweek magazine called her La Presidenta and stated that she was becoming the most important woman behind the throne in all of Latin America. When Peron became president, by title he had less control of the labor movement. But by installing Evita as the Minister of Labor, he was able to still influence the unions with his agendas. Evita's installation in the office was unthinkable to the opposition, and everything that she did was questionable to them. The oligarchy was still old-fashioned and did not accept women in positions other than domestic service. Criticism of Evita's influence came from all sides. At this point, Evita held a position of power, but did not exercise it to its full potential. She was finding her place not only in the government, but in the minds and hearts of her fellow Argentines. A turning point for Evita came in June of 1947 when she traveled to Europe. Evita had always desired to go to Europe, and when the Argentine press first suggested it in February of '47, the country embraced the idea wholeheartedly. A month later, the government accepted an invitation from the Spanish government to visit. France, Italy, and England were also added to the itinerary, but the purpose of her visit was never explained except in the most general terms. She was said to be bringing a message of peace to Europe, stretching a rainbow of beauty between the old and the new continents. The original invitation was political style. Political principle got lost in a grand spectacle full of propagandic opportunities. Before her departure for Europe, Evita was honored at many receptions, rallies, parties, and tributes. Evita said the day before she left, "I am going as the representative of the working people, of my dear descamisados. I leave my heart behind with them." Evita had never traveled so far and was afraid of flying. She wrote a letter to Peron as she flew. "Dear Juan, I am very sad to be leaving because I am unable to live away from you. I love you so much that what I feel for you is a kind of idolatry. Perhaps I don't know how to show what I feel for you, but I assure you that I fought very hard in my life with the ambition to be someone, and I suffered a great deal. But then you came and made me so happy that I thought it was a dream. And since I had nothing else to offer you but my heart and my soul, I gave it to you wholly. But in all these 3 years of happiness, greater each day, I never ceased to adore you for a single hour, or thank heaven for the goodness of God in giving me this reward of your love. And I tried at all times to deserve it by making you happy. I don't know if I achieved that, but I can assure you that nobody has ever loved you or respected you more than I have. I am so faithful to you that if God wished me not to have you in this happiness and took me away, to Evita. It also included, however, several political demonstrations outside her hotel with chants and cries of fascism. She received word that her visit to England was also under some scrutiny from their Labour Party, and that the Queen would not be able to see her as it interfered with the royal family's vacation time. Evita's feelings were hurt, and she announced she would not visit England on the grounds of ill health and time constraints. Evita ended her official tour of Europe in France, anxious to visit all the great fashion houses. It included a great reception, and Evita was a sight to behold by all of French society. She stopped off in Switzerland before leaving Europe, but it was never clear why she went there. On her return to Argentina, she went through Rio, where she attended the Inter-American Conference for Peace and Security. She spent her time there giving speeches to immigrants, explaining the principles of Peronism. From Rio, she headed home, where she was welcomed as a heroine with banners, red carpets, crowds, and Peron. Overall, Evita's visit to Europe was less than ideal. The press branded Evita and Peron as fascists, and fascism had already run its course in Europe unsuccessfully. Perón's control of the press kept this criticism from Argentines, and for the most part, Argentines were proud of how Evita represented them to such acclaim. As happy as Evita was to see her people, her exhaustion overcame her and she collapsed into the arms of her husband. After her trip to Europe, however, Evita's role in Argentina changed gradually. Her style and appearance became less extravagant on a day-to-day basis. Over the course of the next 3 years, she positioned herself in a large and political organization. Her powerful role in Perón's new Argentina was not planned, but evolved over time, similar to Perón's rise in power. He rose to power out of a democracy, but his leadership in the name of social betterment evolved into a dictatorship over time. Congress was still a part of government, but Peronistas controlled the majority of the government. Perón's real power was found in the institutions he and Evita established, and in the masses which supported them. As individuals in the government would question or second-guess his actions or intentions, they were immediately removed from their office and/or arrested. He began to exert complete control, manipulating the press and creating laws giving him absolute authority. Before Evita, women in Argentina were treated as less than citizens without the rights. During this period that Evita was in the forefront of the people. She was at every opening of buildings, unions, factories, and luncheons, as well as new product introductions and sporting events. These daily encounters with Evita produced a public love for her and for Perón. Evita and Perón loved crowds, and crowds loved them. By 1948, she had mastered the ability to deliver a speech full of emotion to solicit an emotional response. She spoke on the dark days of the oligarchy rule and of the present social justice created by Perón. She spoke in emotional terms rather than political. She drew from her acting experiences, and it worked. Her urgent and vivid speeches created an intense loyalty to Perón. They elevated Perón to divine status with statements like, "Perón is everything. He is the soul, the nerve, the hope, and the reality of the Argentine people. We know that there is only one man here in our movement, with his own source of light, and that is Perón. We all feed from his light. The opposition says that is fanaticism, that I am a fanatic for Perón and for the people, that I am dangerous because I'm too sectarian and too fanatic on Perón's behalf. But I answer them with Perón. Fanaticism is the wisdom of the spirit. What matter if one is a fanatic? If one is that in the company of martyrs and heroes. In any case, life has its real value, not when it is lived in a spirit of egoism just for oneself, but when one surrenders oneself completely and fanatically to an ideal that has more value than life itself. I say yes. I am fanatically for Perón and the descamisados of the nation. Before Perón came to power, the women of the oligarchy, better known as La Sociedad de Beneficencia, acted as the welfare of the country, supposedly caring for the elderly, sick, and orphaned through charitable efforts. Contrary to public belief, the women did not raise their own funds, and the money they received from the government was not put to good use and was quite ineffective. Traditionally, the president's wife would be appointed as honorary president of the society, but not wanting to lose control, the members said Evita was too young and therefore unsuitable. Evita began to create her own charitable efforts. Her first charitable act was termed the Crusade of Social Aid, when Evita handed out food at Christmas time in 1946 to old people and strikers. The next year, she and Perón personally received poor people at their residence, distributing thousands of packages of traditional Argentinian foods. She began to see the importance of her welfare as she received more and more letters and visitors. Her ideologies soon spread throughout the country. She began receiving charitable contributions throughout all of Argentina from unions and workers of what they produced or manufactured. Everything from furniture to food, shoes, clothing, money, all was sent to Evita. All the inventory was logged, and as people told Evita their needs, she would see that they would receive what they needed and more than what they asked for. By May of 1948, she was receiving 12,000 letters each day requesting help. In July of 1948, Evita founded the Eva Maria Duarte de Peron Foundation with 10,000 pesos and legal rights from the government. The name changed to the Eva Peron Foundation 2 years later. The objectives of the foundation were widespread. They included providing money and resources to any person or business which Evita felt deserved them. The foundation also built houses, schools, hospitals, and welfare establishments wherever they were needed. Her foundation became as large as any other government department. Whatever the foundation needed to meet needs was given by Argentine companies, either by their own generosity or by the heavy persuasion from the government. For example, a business may have received a request for a donation of what it needed, in goods or cash, and if the donation was not received, the business could be shut down by the government. The foundation further alienated Evita and Peron from the upper and middle classes, as the foundation took money from their pockets and gave it to the poor. The foundation accumulated assets in cash and goods worth over 3 billion pesos, or $200 million at the time. Its goods were stored in large warehouses, and although the foundation was shut down by later governments, goods were still handwritten, and the authority to give was Evita's initials. When Evita received these visitors, she would give each person some cash as they left. It was the foundation that completely changed Evita. She was no longer a star from the radio. She was a woman with a mission. She worked tirelessly round the clock, up to 20 hours a day. She now dressed not lavishly, but in black suits like uniforms, with her hair swept back, making her appear much older than she was. A Catholic poet who observed her at work wrote, "There were human beings in that room with dirty clothes, and they smelt very bad. Evita would place her fingers into their wounds, for she was able to see the pain of all these people and feel it herself. She could touch the most terrible things with a Christian attitude that amazed me, kissing and letting herself be kissed. There was a girl whose lip was half eaten away with syphilis, and when I saw that Evita was about to kiss her and tried to stop her, she said to me, 'Do you know what it will mean when I kiss her?' Evita felt she had to do such things. She loved the poor and gave up her life to them. It was these acts that caused many to elevate her to sainthood, if only in their minds." By the next election year, 1951, Peron had begun to take actions that caused many to question some of his policies and the direction he was taking in the government. The absolute control which he exercised was becoming a dictatorship. The middle class was not richer than they had been in 1946, but the working class was. Evita was without a doubt the second in command through the influence of her foundation and her relationships with the unions. She began to seek a more official position and began to speak of plans to run with Peron as his vice president. At the same time, however, it was becoming apparent that Evita was a very ill woman. Even though she denied her pain, it was quite evident to everyone close to her, and her sickly appearance made it obvious to everyone. She had become thin and pale. Her face was drawn, her eyes shadowed, and her legs continually swollen. She had a constant fever and began to complain of intense abdominal pains. Peron was able to convince her not to run for the office with him because of logistics in the Constitution, but it was heart-wrenching to Evita to convey this to their shirtless ones. She was seen less and less at campaign speeches, but the people's support for her was unwavering. Peron had become a secondary role in the hearts of their supporters, and Evita had taken center stage in Peronism. In September of 1951, Evita was diagnosed with cancer of the uterus in an advanced state and with dangerous side effects. Evita, however, was never told her diagnosis, and she refused to be treated for it. Her loyal followers began to have masses and fervent prayers for her health. She was able to get out of bed for an appearance on October 17th, commemorating Peron's release from prison and the anniversary of the beginning of Peronism. Evita was able, in a faint and hoarse voice, to thank the crowd. I could never repay him, even by giving him my life, to thank him for how good he always was to me and is to me. Nothing I have, nothing I am, nothing I think is mine. It all belongs to Peron. I will not tell the usual lie. I will not say, I don't deserve this, my general. I deserve it for the happiness of one descamisado is worth more than my own life. Evita's health worsened after this public appearance, but the people would continue to hear many last words from her, usually pleading for loyalty to Peron and urging the people to fight for Peronism at all costs. She did not want to retreat from the public eye, going to extremes, even wearing braces to hold her up that were covered by bulky fur coats, hiding her thin, frail body. Peron did win the election by an even larger margin than in 1946, mostly due to the support of the new women voters. But Evita's health continued to wane, and the country seemed to be crumbling with her. During her last few months, she wrote her biography and her will. Consistent with her life, she wished for all things in her life to go to her beloved shirtless ones. Evita died peacefully in her home, July 26, 1952, at 8:25 in the evening. She was only 33 years old. Peron immediately sent for Dr. Pedro Ara, a professor in anatomy and a noted embalmer. He began to work on Evita's lifeless body, and overnight, her body was suitable for public viewing. Peron had her placed in a coffin with a glass lid and moved to the Ministry of Labor office. In the move, the nation's grief was already apparent. The crowd was so dense, the streets were congested for 10 blocks in every direction. 8 people were killed in the crush to see the coffin, and in one day, over 2,100 people were injured. 3 days were set aside for people to file past her coffin, but it was apparent that many more people wished to see her one last time, and the ceremony was extended indefinitely. Lines stretched as long as 30 blocks in every direction for weeks. Evita's photograph was on posters everywhere, and businesses were shut down for days. Thousands of small altars with her picture could be found in homes, businesses, and in streets. When it was apparent that her body was not prepared for this type of exhibition, Dr. Ara persuaded Peron that the body needed to be moved so he could continue the embalming process. On August 10th, more than 2 weeks after her death, Peron had the coffin placed on a gun carriage and paraded through the streets of Buenos Aires, down the Avenida de Mayo to the headquarters for the CGT. The crowds were held back by 17,000 soldiers as the spectators watched the coffin, nurses at the foundation, cadets, union members, Peron, the family and government officials walk by in a procession that took 3 hours to cover 20 blocks. It was the most elaborate funeral procession Argentina and most parts of the world had ever seen, especially for someone who was not an official head of state.
cry for me, though I am an essential part of your existence. All my love and pain is reserved for me to carry out my purpose for the humble people, to be perfect like a disciple of Jesus Christ.
Thousands of visitors come to Recoleta Cemetery each year to see her tomb and pay homage to her memory. Not a day goes by without fresh flowers being presented in her memory. Eva Peron passed into immortality at the young age of 33. But her few years in power and the legacy she left will forever endure in the hearts, minds, and lives of the Argentine people. 45 years after her death, the world still thinks about this woman who rose out of poverty to become one of the most powerful in power, reflect a girl with a dream, and a woman who fulfilled dreams. She was a woman not only in love with a man, but with a country of people whom she tried to unify. Argentina will never forget her, and the world should not either.